It's my pleasure to welcome everyone here today to our 4th annual Orrin Hatch Economic Summit. The Senator's been a tremendous supporter of Utah Valley University, and as part of that support, he's put together this summit that on an annual basis brings some of the brightest minds in the United States on economics to Utah Valley University. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce the 5th president of Utah Valley University, President Matthew S. Holland.
Thank you, Vice President Peterson. It's a treat for me to be with you and just offer a brief word of welcome to what now has become a fairly robust tradition here at Utah Valley University, our annual economic forum, organized through Senator Hatch's good graces and energies, and we are very grateful for Senator Hatch, and he'll be introduced formally here in just a moment. But I wanted just a word to thank him and for his willingness to do this. We talk at UVU about being an engaged institution. That's one of our core themes. And what that means is that we have to take the things that we're studying in the classroom and the theories and the textbook insights and think about those and apply those in a real-world context. And that's one of the things that I think is distinctive about the Economic Forum and the way that Senator Hatch organizes this, as that he comes at it from a perspective and brings special guests that come from a perspective of those who have great academic credentials and background and experience, but have also dealt with issues in the real world, especially economic issues in the real world. And that will be the case today, and I won't steal his thunder by introducing his special guest today. We'll let him do that. But on behalf of the whole university, we want to extend a heartfelt welcome to our special guest and organizing force in the form of Senator Hatch, and a special welcome to all of you. Thank you for coming and listening and contributing today.
So I will outline the program today, and what we're going to do, we'll have some remarks by Senator Hatch, and he will also introduce Mr. Lindsey. Then we'll have some remarks by Mr. Lindsey and a presentation by him, and then when he finishes those remarks, then we'll have a panel discussion as well as a question and answer period, which will be moderated by Dr. Eugene Seeley, who is our Assistant Dean from the Woodbury School of Business. Just a little bit about Dr. Seeley. He has a specialty in international business. He also has a PhD in business administration from the University of Utah, and also has a master's degree from the Thunderbird School of International Management, just so you're aware of his background. When the panel discussion is finished, then Senator Hatch will have some closing remarks, and then I will wrap it up. And so with that, I'd like to introduce our senior senator from the state of Utah, Senator Orrin Hatch. He's now in his 6th term. He's married to Elaine Hansen of Newton, Utah. They are the proud parents of 6 children, 23 grandchildren, and 10 great-grandchildren. And he's very proud of his family, of the legacy that the Hatch family has, and what they are all doing. He is, as a senior senator, he's worked on many different initiatives. He's known for his bipartisan work. He's worked hard on the balanced budget amendment throughout his career. He's strengthened the commitment to legal immigration and the American Security Act. He's worked on the Religious Freedom Restoration Act and the American with Disabilities Act. He's also an advocate of the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act and the Utah School Trust Lands Exchange Act. He's been instrumental in that, in helping Utah be able to garner more funds for its school children through exchanges of trust lands. He's also the senior senator on the Senate Committee on Finance. He serves as a member of the Judiciary Committee, the Senate Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, and the Joint Committee on Taxation. He also is serving currently on the board of directors for the Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Just on a special note, Senator Hatch has continually come to our campus. He's made himself available to our students. We're excited to have him on campus, and with that, I'd like to introduce Senator Orrin Hatch.
Well, thank you so much. I want to thank all of you for coming here today. You're in for a real treat, because we've got one of the greatest people in government, or who has been in government with all kinds of experience, who's here with us today. There are many people who can speak authoritatively about economic and fiscal policy, but there are few people who can do so in an accessible and insightful manner. Dr. Larry Lindsey is one of these few. His commitment to public service is very admirable. He has served as the governor of the Federal Reserve System and under Presidents Ronald Reagan and the first President Bush. He was a key advisor to President George W. Bush, serving as the director of the National Economic Council and as the assistant to the president on economic policy. His work was instrumental in securing the pro-growth tax relief that has now become one of the central issues in this election cycle. Unfortunately, President Obama has made increased taxes on the upper brackets a centerpiece of his campaign, even though that would mean significant new tax burdens on small businesses that will be the engine of pure and better economic recovery. This insistence on tax increases, regardless of their impact on economic growth, is deeply concerning to me and many, many others on both sides of the floor in the Senate. And I expect that Larry will discuss those proposals today, in part. In large part, our weak economic recovery, the worst since the Second World War, is owing to the failure of Washington to advance pro-growth fiscal policies that will jumpstart job creation. For 42 consecutive months, the unemployment rate has remained above 8%. There has been a net increase of just over 400,000 payroll jobs since the president took office and since the recession ended in June of 2009. According to the National Bureau of Economic Research, job growth has averaged only 75,000 per month. Larry understands that we need fiscal, tax, and entitlement reform if we're going to grow the economy, create jobs, and get our debt, our national debt, under control. Most of you are probably familiar with Paul Ryan. He is a great and fresh face for responsible conservative fiscal reforms. But I think the folks like me and Larry, who have a few more miles on the tires, still have something to add or know another way to skin the cat. Let me tell you a story. There was this old farmer who worked so hard every day that he hardly had any time to enjoy the large pond in his backyard. He had fixed it up years earlier with picnic tables, horseshoe courts, and benches. One evening, he decided to go down and see how things were holding up, and much to his surprise, he heard voices shouting in the pond, and when he came closer, he saw a group of women skinny dipping in his pond. He made the women aware of his presence, and they all went to the deep end. One of the women shouted to him, "We're not coming out until you leave." The old farmer replied, "Don't worry, I did not come down here to watch you ladies swim or to make you get out of the pond. I only came down to feed the alligator." Now, I believe, and I think Larry does as well, that the American people are not often given a stark presentation of the real options before them. Congressman Paul Ryan and Governor Romney have advanced bold tax and entitlement reform proposals. You might not agree with every one of those proposals, but they are serious plans to get our fiscal house back in order. And I believe that if you disagree with those proposals, you are obligated and obliged to offer up an alternative. Yet rather than put forward a serious alternative, the president is standing on the sidelines. It has been more than 3 years since the Senate, which has been under Democratic control the entire time, has passed even a budget resolution, which is required by law, by the way. And for the third straight year, the president's budget that he submitted failed to get a single vote in the Senate and in the House. And the fact is, the president cannot put forward serious fiscal solutions because his political base refuses meaningful reforms of the spending programs that are really bankrupting our country. And the alternative massive tax increases that would be required to finance the president's commitment to larger government is totally unacceptable to the vast majority of American taxpayers. Now, he suggests that our books can be balanced just by taxing the rich. But no serious person believes that the Obama administration's government can be financed simply by going after the wealthy. The only way to do it is by raising taxes on everyone. Consider the math on the so-called Buffett tax, promoted by the president, named after Warren Buffett, a friend of mine, by the way. I have breakfast with him at least once a year, because of his supposed altruism in supporting higher taxes. The president believes that he can quote Warren Buffett. Now, this bill, introduced by Senate Democrats back in April, would have imposed a 30% minimum tax on anyone earning more than $1 million. But according to the Joint Tax Committee, the Buffett tax on the so-called rich, which, by the way, would hit around 940,000 small businesses, the businesses that create about 70% of the jobs in this country, would have raised less than $5 billion per year, or enough to pay 1 week's interest on the national debt. And since the Democrat tax-the-rich approach doesn't add up, the actual fiscal position of my friends on the other side remains under wraps. But I believe that they have only one option, and that's a value-added tax, or VAT, layered on top of our existing income tax system. A new VAT appears to be the only option left to our friends on the other side of the aisle if they want to continue spending at current projections. And keep in mind, this would be a VAT used in conjunction with, not as a replacement for, the already burdensome income tax system. Now, this VAT would have to be significant. According to the Congressional Budget Office, a 5% broad-based VAT would raise $2.5 trillion. Yet our fiscal hole is $3.5 trillion, or $1 trillion more. So to get to fiscal sustainability, the president and his congressional allies would have to propose a VAT rate higher than 5%. This new tax would effectively be a tax hike on every American, including those who currently pay no income tax, and retired taxpayers who already paid a lifetime of income taxes. If a VAT were imposed on top of our existing income tax system, it would likely cripple our economy by imposing new costs on virtually every purchase of goods and services in the U.S. It would hamper manufacturing and kill entire retail sectors. Worst of all, it would be the most regressive tax ever imposed on the American people, disproportionately impacting families with lower incomes who spend a higher percentage of their wages on necessities. Unfortunately, in reporting on the fiscal options available to us, there is a double standard that favors President Obama. We have seen the highest level of scrutiny applied to Governor Romney's tax reform plan when it comes to policies that would put us on a path to fiscal sustainability. However, the lack of detail provided by the president goes largely unquestioned by our beloved media in this country. Yet I believe that the missing piece is really there for all to see. Merely hitting job-creating business owners and people who invest and build capital with higher taxes does not fill our fiscal gap. We could confiscate all the income earned by millionaires and still fall short of righting our fiscal ship. It is unfortunate, but over the last few years, the president has failed to lay the foundation necessary for growth in jobs in the economy. We are lucky today to have Dr. Larry Lindsey, one of the most experienced people, not only in government, but in the private sector as well, who is highly respected on both sides of the aisle, with us to outline what pro-growth reforms look like, and of course to cover anything else that he wants to cover. All I can say is that we're lucky to have this great man here in our home state of Utah and at this great university. So without ado, I think we'll call on Dr. Lindsey.
Thank you, Senator, for those very, very generous comments. I'm fortunate that, as a citizen, that the people of Utah have been sending Senator Hatch to Washington. He's a man who gets things done by looking at the facts and is willing to go across the aisle if necessary to make that happen. So, Senator, it's a real pleasure to be here with you. I'm going to, I hope everyone's in a good mood. I'm about to ruin it. We have some severe problems, not just in this country, but around the world. My profession thought it had the economic problems solved. A few years ago, my colleagues were patting themselves on the back, thinking they'd repealed the business cycle. They called it the Great Moderation. Well, what they were really doing, what government was really doing, was setting us up for a big fall. We know that that's now happened. And what I'd like to do to set up the conversation for tax reform is to talk a little bit about the hole we're in. Not just the United States, but the whole world. Just to give you a sense of the comprehensive nature of the reforms that need doing. Let me start with a picture of what's been happening really since the end of the World War II. I think this is as history as we know it because it starts roughly when I was born, and I don't care what happened before then. And it's a long enough period to study. And there are two lines. This is the ratio of how much wealth we have as people compared to our income. The blue line is what we call the standard wealth to income ratio. The red line subtracts out what we as citizens really owe if we're going to pay off the federal debt. Well, let's look at the chart a few different ways. The first of all, from the 1952 until roughly the early 1990s, those two lines were quite stable. Running between 400 and 500%. In other words, this is how much wealth we have as a country relative to how much income we generate. And I'm not going to bore you with why economic theories say that should be a stable number. It is. And then all of a sudden, we sort of have a breakout up there in the 1990s. This was bubble number one. Wealth to income ratio in bubble number one soared to well over 600%, meaning all of a sudden we all felt richer. Well, what happens when you feel richer? Gee, I don't have to save as much. I can spend a little bit more. I can buy that extra car. I can add the addition to my house. And when we all feel richer, we all go out and spend. The trouble is, if we're feeling richer, but we don't have the income to service the debts we incur, once we begin to get a little bit nervous, we find ourselves ever more in debt. We say, uh-oh, I overspent. If I overspend, I start cutting back. When I start cutting back, the economy starts to slow down, and we have a recession. And that's the story of the bubble of the 1990s. You might recall, although folks here might be a little bit young, read your history books. 1990s were an interesting decade. We had something called the dot-com bubble. People formed businesses, sold stock. The NASDAQ went from under 1,000 to over 5,000. People were making money quick. People were therefore feeling rich. And then it all came crashing down starting in the beginning of 2000. And then you see what happened. The wealth to income ratio crumbled. Well, I was in the private sector at the time, and I had just left the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve System, and my good friend Alan Greenspan was still the chairman. And he and before I left, I'd said, you can read it in the Fed minutes, I said, we got a bubble on our hands, and we shouldn't be accommodating it. We did, and there you go. And later on, the bubble got worse, and I went in and I said to Alan, I said, what are we going to do once it bursts? He said, don't worry. And he came up with a great line that I hope everyone remembers. He said, 1929 did not cause 1933. Depends on what you do in 30 and 31. So we got ready for the bubble to burst. And on January 3rd, 2001, before President Bush took office, it was obvious it had. The NASDAQ had already fallen 65% from its peak. We had a conference in Austin where private sector guys came in and told the president-elect things were falling apart quickly. The chairman began a series of interest rate cuts that day. We had prepared the president's tax cut proposal. We pulled out our textbooks and we did exactly what they said to do when the bubble bursts, which is cut interest rates to stimulate with monetary policy, cut taxes to stimulate with fiscal policy. We did it, and we were very, very proud of ourselves. 2 years later, the economy was growing robustly again. I was in the White House. Greenspan and I had breakfast. You know, we could almost high-five each other. I can't imagine quite high-fiving Greenspan, I got to tell you. But, you know, metaphorically, okay, we were high-fiving each other. I look back on that, and one thing that all professions are guilty of is hubris. You think you know too much. What did we really do by cutting interest rates? We started a second bubble. And there it is. We all remember that. We're still living through the after effects of it. This time it didn't happen through dot-coms. It happened through the housing market. We kept money cheap too long. House prices have been going up since the 30s. Everyone believed house prices could only go up. My gosh, if you can borrow, back then you could borrow at, you know, the same rate my parents got in the 50s for their house. You could borrow at 5%. If your house is going up at 10% and you can finance it with 5%, it's like printing money. You know, imagine being able to borrow at 5 and make 10%, right? The more you do it, the more you get. The richer you get. The wealth to income ratio didn't stop at 600%. This time it went all the way up to 650%. We started selling 17.5 million cars a year, financed by the money we were making on the houses because house prices were going up. Well, it burst. Here we are. And not only did we do it, but everyone around the world did it. And I want to get to that. Let's take a look at this chart. This is our country's situation. And what it shows relative to GDP is credit market liabilities. This is just the debt outstanding that we have to service. And down there on the bottom, you have government, you have money we borrow from the rest of the world borrows from us, non-financial businesses, households, and finance. They all add up. And look at what happened. We had a debt-to-income ratio for the country running right around 150%. Again, from the Stone Age, 1951, all the way up to the mid-1980s. And then we had a few reforms, got our corporate sector a little more leveraged. And what happened? The debt-to-income ratio in the 90s began to rise, first to 250%, then up and up and up and up to almost 400%. That meant that we had to service almost $4 in debt for every dollar in income we had. Well, just do the math. Suppose you have an interest rate of 5% and you have debt of 400% of income. That means you got to pay 5% interest on 400% of your income every year. That's 20% just going to interest payments. Think of what that's going to do to your household finance, to government's finance, what have you. So the bubble burst. It turns out it's come down a little bit. This is the private sector has deleveraged. And when you're deleveraging, it means you're paying off debt. And when you're paying off debt, you're not spending. And when you're not spending, that's when you have tough economic times. So if I put this all in perspective, why are we where we are? Because we got too clever. We printed money. We felt richer. We thought that money was there forever. We borrowed against it. We took our debt burden way, way up. We realized the wealth wasn't there to pay it off. And so we're now paying the price. And not only that, we haven't been too smart on this recovery. This is, I call it the spaghetti chart. You see all the strands of spaghetti, they kind of go up, 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 up. This is what happens to GDP during a typical recession, actually all of the recessions. You start at 0 at the business cycle peak, then you're kind of soggy for a while, and then eventually you recover. And typically you'll see where we are now, which is 18 quarters after the business cycle peak. Generally the economy has recovered fully. You're usually 10% ahead of where you've been. How about this recovery? We're not 10% ahead. In 18 quarters, in 4.5 years, our economy has grown combined only 1%. Almost no recovery at all. And when you look at the employment picture, we haven't recovered. Look at where the strands of spaghetti go. Typically, at this point in an expansion, you've gained anywhere from 2% to 10% more jobs than where you were at the peak of the business cycle. Where are we now? We're still down 4% jobs. That's roughly 5 million jobs. We have 5 million fewer people working today than when we began this process in December of 2007. Well, we know why we got into the recession. I think these last two charts show that the, quote, recovery efforts our government has been doing haven't worked. We're barely above where we were in 2007 on GDP. We're 4% below where we were in December 2007 in terms of jobs. And we're even more in debt at the federal level. Well, no one's been doing a good job. Everybody's been doing the same thing. So what I have here is the IMF growth forecast. Now, okay, this has got to stay within this room. Some of my good friends work for the IMF, okay? And that's why I'm using their forecast. But let's just say that the IMF tends to listen to its member governments and what they say in their economic projections. And no government is that pessimistic about what the future looks like. So why don't we just, within this room, call these optimistic? Okay. Now we can talk again. There we have it. These are really, really soggy numbers. Nobody is even growing much above trend. You're talking about the developed world growing at less than 2%, even by their own government's forecasts. And they're trying hard to do it. The 2012 average deficit to GDP in the United States was 9%. Across the whole area, it was averaged almost 8%. So our government, on average, our governments, on average, are adding to that debt profile to the tune of 8% a year for every dollar being generated. The debt mountain's getting bigger, at least at the governmental level. And not only are they borrowing, which is what the old economics profession used to say you should do, borrow and spend, they're printing money like it's going out of style. That last column is how fast we're expanding our central bank's balance sheet. Our central bank is known as the Federal Reserve. Europe has the European Central Bank, Japan, the Bank of Japan, Britain, the Bank of England. Let's keep in mind what that 216% number means. That's growth. That means that the amount of money that we have in circulation today is more than 3 times what it was in 2008. So we're borrowing to the tune of 9% of GDP, adding to our debt. And we're printing money to tripling the amount of money in circulation, all to get what is at best a subpar economic performance. Here we have it. We started off in 2007 with a Fed balance sheet of about $850 billion. And this is how it's composed. We don't care about the details too much. It is now just under $3 trillion. That means in a country of 300 million people, we have roughly $10,000 in cash circulating for each one of us. Let me check my wallet. It's not mine. Do any of you have it? I'm being facetious, of course. But the point is, this amount of money, the Fed, and it's well backed up by traditional economic thought, is trying to force feed money into the economy in order to get us to spend more. That's really not working. The federal government is borrowing money faster than it ever has, spending it to try and push the economy, and it's not working. We are still in a hole. And that's why the title of the talk is, If You're in a Hole, Stop Digging. Well, let's take a look at what's going to happen if we continue down this path. Now, I'm going to start with the Congressional Budget Office. And this is how much additional debt we're going to be adding under various scenarios. And if you start at the top there, it says CBO January baseline deficit. Well, it says that in the next 4 years, we're going to be adding about $2.5 trillion by their projections. And under their projections, about $4 trillion more over the next 10 years. Well, CBO has something called directed scoring. It doesn't say what it really thinks it's going to happen. It is bound by Congress to score things a certain way. So let's think about some of those assumptions that may go by the wayside. The first one is they're told to assume that there's no increase in government spending. Who here thinks we're going to have no increases in government spending in the next 10 years? Oh, gosh. I guess you don't believe the CBO forecast. Well, if we just sort of relax that a little bit, that's going to add over the next 10 years $1,366 billion. That's assuming that government spending grows just as fast as the economy, no faster. Next line. Extend Bush tax cuts for the middle class. Well, this is not what Senator Hatch was talking about. This is everybody else. This is something everyone likes. I mean, that's where all the voters are. Well, if you assume that they're actually going to be extended, probably are, president's for it, Republicans are for it, there's another $2,895 billion in costs. Oh, extend Bush tax cuts for the rich. Well, gosh, I thought all the tax cuts went to the rich, Senator. That's a kind of tiny number, isn't it? $867 billion over 10 years. That's only $87 billion a year. Let's see, we're running a deficit of $1 trillion. And even if you eliminate all the Bush tax cuts for the rich, you're going to get $87 billion. In other words, you're going to cover 9 cents on the dollar of the Obama cuts for what he's saying about the soak the rich. 9 cents on the dollar. That's his whole platform. Then the next line is the payroll tax cut. Well, President Obama brought that one in. We now have a 2% a year reduction in our payroll taxes. Almost all that benefit goes to the middle class. The president, I think, wants to extend that. I'm not sure. But that's going to be pain for a lot of voters. Well, if we don't incur that pain, $1,455 billion more. AMT patch. Now, out here in Utah, you have very well-run government, so you probably don't have a lot of AMT payers. They're mostly in places like New York and California and Illinois. Well, I'll stop there, Senator. I defer to your colleagues from those states. But there's another $800 billion. By the way, the AMT patch is going to be passed, so don't worry about it. Then we have the doc fix, and I won't go into the details of that. That's going to pass, so $326 billion. Then we have to worry about, gee, if we're going to spend all this extra money, we're going to have to borrow it. And if we're going to have to borrow it, we're going to have to pay interest on it. And that's the debt service line. So just the interest on all these other things that are going to happen add another $1 trillion to the cost. So if you walk away from the CBO directed scoring assumptions, which talk about $4 trillion in average debt over the next 10 years, and you put back in some realistic assumptions about what's actually going to happen, it's not $4 trillion, it's $12.9 trillion, $13 trillion more in debt. Well, I told you I wasn't going to cheer you up. Now, CBO also makes an assumption about how fast the economy is going to grow. And it's not quite as bad as the Obama forecast. Every year, the Obama budget says the economy is going to grow at 4% next year. And then next year comes and it grows at 2, and so say, well, next year it's going to grow at 4. And next year it's going to grow at 4. Well, I don't put a lot of stock in that. The economy's growing at 2. So let's say instead of the rosy assumptions, we only grow at 2%. Well, if we only grow at 2%, we're going to take in less tax revenue, and we're going to have more spending because there are going to be fewer people working and more people on government programs. And if you make that assumption, that we're only going to grow at 2%, which is all the way, by the way, all we've been growing at, that adds another $3 trillion to the debt. And of course, if we add $3 trillion to the debt, we got to borrow the money. And if we got to borrow the money, we got to pay interest on the debt. And the interest on the debt, from just assuming we're going to grow at 2%, is another $288 billion, which takes us up to $16 trillion in added debt. Kind of far from that $4 trillion original assumption, isn't it? One more little adjustment to make. Any economics majors or finance majors here? All right. What's the 10-year bond yielding? What can the government borrow at right now? Oh, okay. You're off the hook. I'll let you off the hook. Anybody? Right now, Uncle Sam can borrow for 10 years at 1 3/4%. Pretty cheap, huh? If you look at the average cost of federal borrowing over the last 20 years, when inflation hasn't been too high, the average cost has been 5.7%. Well, we're not going to go up there right away, but suppose we gradually see the cost of borrowing rise to 5.7% instead of where we are now. That extra interest, just the extra interest on all the money we're borrowing, adds $3.881 trillion to the price tag. So if you actually assume we're going to keep spending, if you actually assume we're not going to grow much faster, and if you assume interest rates are going to go back to normal, what you end up with is not $4 trillion in extra budget borrowing. The number's $20 trillion. The hole is deep, and we're digging as fast as we can. And unfortunately, the official numbers coming out of Washington are unrealistic about how bad the situation is. All right, so here we have it. Federal budget is unsustainable. Well, where are we now? The green line, excuse me, the red line is the CBO projections. The green line is if we grow with 2%. And the blue line is what I just showed you, which is we grow at 2% and interest rates go back to normal. So CBO is projecting that the debt is going to grow by 2022 up to about 95%. The real number is well over 120%. Has anyone seen that Italy, for example, is in financial trouble, or Spain? We will be beyond Italy and Spain by 2022 under realistic assumptions. That's where our country is headed. And if you watch the TV, you can see what's happening in countries like that who face an unsustainable debt situation. Something's got to be done. Let's think of it in terms of households. This is per household federal debt. 2008, it was $57,000 per household. Right now, it's $94,000. At the end of the next presidential term, it's going to be $115,000. And by 2020, it's going to be pushing $160,000 in federal debt for every household in America. Now, that debt ultimately has to be paid off. Senator, you used the phrase a few more miles on the tires for you and me. Who do you think is really going to have to pay that off? Are you and me going to be paying that off? Thank you very much. We appreciate your help. It's wonderful to be young. All right. Well, should we do it all at once? I don't think so. You're going to hear talk in the campaign and on the news about a fiscal cliff. Senator Hatch's colleagues and the president have tended to, we call it, kick the can down the road. Gee, I don't want to deal with that problem. I know there's a problem. I don't want to deal with it quite yet. So let's just keep doing what we're doing for just a little bit while longer. And then that expires, and, well, I don't want to deal with it quite now. There's an election coming up, so let's do it just a little bit while longer. Well, the cans have been kicked. And I don't know what it is. This is a leap year, right? It's divisible by 4. And somehow, all the cans have been kicked to the end of leap year. They managed to think about years. What else happens in years divisible by 4? Oh, well, whatever it is. I think it's around November 6th, if I'm not mistaken. But all the cans have been kicked to December 31st. Now, what if we don't do anything before December 31st? Well, if they don't do something about the cans, a lot of them are going to expire. And there's the list. Oh, there's the rich and the poor. So just one more year of extending the cans. Middle class tax cuts are 173. High-end tax cuts are 75. So that gives you a rough approximation of how much money is involved in each one. But if they all expire on January 1, suddenly $668 billion more dollars is either going to be going into Washington out of our pockets, or not coming from Washington. And that's called a fiscal contraction, meaning the guys who spend and create jobs, the businesses of America, the consumers of America, will have $668 billion less in their pockets on January 1 at an annual rate than on December 31st. That's the equivalent of more than 4% of GDP. If I cut your paycheck by 4% of GDP, you got problems. And let's put it in terms of a typical person in this room, or a typical family. Family making $60,000, right? Smack in the middle of the income distribution. Just the Bush tax cuts for that $60,000 four-person family amount to about $1,750. Just the Bush tax cut portion. So, you know, that's about $38 less a week coming in, when that's a lot of money. You got to figure out something to cut, $38 worth. And eventually it all adds up. This is going to tip us into a recession if we don't do something. Okay. How about the spending side? Well, here's spending as a percentage of GDP. And you can see that's really where the problem is. We've gone from a long-term historic trend of bumping right around 20. In 2008, we were at 20.8. We went up all the way to 25.3 in 2011. We're now down to 24.3. Spending is too high. Where has it grown? Defense has grown a touch. Interest has come down. Why has interest come down? I told you before, right? Record low interest rates because the Fed is borrowing it. What's up is other kinds of spending. How about who's paying the taxes? Well, we always hear that the rich have gotten richer. And so what I did was list there the Census Bureau income shares. And back under Johnson, the rich were getting 16.8% of income. They were paying 34% of the taxes. Now they're getting 21.5% of income, 5% more of the income. And they're paying 59% of the taxes. 5% of the households are paying 59% of the taxes. Senator Hatch made an important point. You could take away all the income from millionaires, and you wouldn't really be making a dent in the deficit. There's our problem. We're in a hole. We've soaked the rich. Most of the money that's going to come from taxes is going to come from the middle class. We're going to have to cut spending. It isn't going to be easy. And we're going to have to get growth going again. So I'll come back for the questions and the discussion to two basic ideas. And I understand you've done them in Utah. Let's focus on quality instead of quantity. Let's not just cut government spending willy-nilly. Let's do what any business would do, which is do cost-benefit analysis. You run a rate of return on a government project. If it meets your cost of borrowing, you do it. If it doesn't meet your cost of borrowing, you don't do it. The president's always saying the government's got to spend money to keep the economy going. Well, think about this. Suppose you borrow at 1 3/4%, and you end up with a project that doesn't yield you anything at all, yields you 0. Are you better off or worse off if you borrow, even at a low rate, and get no return? The same thing's true on our tax side. We've got to do fundamental tax reform because we're raising money in a wasteful way. Enough of the talk about quantity. Let's stop digging the hole, and let's get the economy going again through higher quality programs. Thank you.
Dr. Eugene Seeley, the Dean of the Woodbury School of Business, is going to conduct from here on in, and Larry and I are going to be subject to whatever you want us to be subject to. Very good. Tremendous.
Thank you.
Oh. Why are you here? Okay, is my mic on?
Yeah, sounds like it.
On? Testing, testing.
Yeah.
Looks like they're looking. There we go. Got it. Okay, very good. Well, we've asked some people to submit questions from the audience here, and I'll read through these here, and may even throw in 1 or 2 of my own if that's okay. So, first, Dr. Lindsey, what do you think about the recent attempts by the Fed to stimulate the economy?
The Fed's in a box. Its job is to keep the financial system together. When the bubble, which it had a part in creating, I'll admit, fell apart, it didn't know what to do for sure. We had never been in a situation like this before. And so it acted very aggressively. One of the hardest things, when I am not a government official, for me to remember, is just how tough it is to be a government official. Because when you're in real time and you got to make a decision in real time and you have a crisis on your hands, you do whatever seems to make sense. And I think that's what the Fed did, and I think Ben Bernanke has given a lot of himself for this country, a lot of sleepless nights, a lot of stress. Yeah. My concern is not what's happened to date. My concern is that we're now 4 years after the crisis. and we're still acting as if we're in the middle of a crisis. At some point, you have to return to normal. You can't do crisis policies forever. And that's why I think the time has come to stop printing money and stop the deficit and begin the process of returning the country to normal.
Another question, perhaps both of you can respond to. The president seems to want to stimulate the economy through government spending. Republicans want to allow the private sector to drive the economy. Why is one way better than the other?
Well, let me take a crack at that. The fact of the matter is, if we don't have a vibrant private economy, we're not going to be able to get anything under control. So we want to have the type of economic system with the proper type of incentives that really get the private sector going again. And right now, it's not going well. There are certain segments that go well, but if you look at it across the board, it's not going well. And part of the reason is because there's too much government intrusion, too many rules and regulations. There's too much, even the taxes are too high. Almost everybody agrees we should cut taxes. And it's astounding to people to find out that the Joint Committee on Taxation, of which I'm a member, it's a nonpartisan group. We don't tell the economists what to do. We pay attention to what they say. They say that the bottom 51% of all wage earners don't pay a dime or a penny of income taxes. Now, I don't see how you run the country on that basis. Now, I remember when Secretary Geithner was before the committee, I asked my usual 5 minutes of questions, and then I waited to the end when all the other senators had gone, except for the chairman, Baucus, and myself. He turned to me and he said, "Would you like to ask some more questions?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, here's the gavel, I'm going." So that's when I said to Secretary Geithner, I said, "You're aware that the bottom 51% of all households don't pay a dime of income taxes or don't even pay a penny of it?" He said, "Yes." I said, but then he said, "But they pay payroll taxes." I said, "Well, yeah, everybody does that because that's Social Security." I said, "But you're aware that 23 million of them get refundable tax credits that are more than they pay in payroll taxes." He had to admit that. Then I said, "And there's another almost 16 million who pay who receive refundable tax credits, money from the federal government, that happens to be more than they and their employers pay in payroll taxes." I said, "No, I'm not suggesting that we tax the truly poor. This is a great nation. We can take care of our truly poor. But you can't tell me that the whole bottom 51% of all households is truly poor." And that's not just individuals. That's households, husbands, wives, older children. Fact of the matter is, we've got to find some way of resolving these problems. And both parties, in my opinion, are responsible for this. It's apparent that we're not, and at the same time, we have about a little less than 16% revenue coming in when we are used to somewhere around 18, 19, or 20%, but usually 18.5%. And yet we're spending more and more and more, and on top of that, they add Obamacare, which is going to eat us alive. So these are just problems that all of you young folks are going to inherit if we don't stop it, if we don't find some way of changing it. And I'm convinced we've got to change Congress in order to do that. That's one reason why I'm a strong supporter of the Balanced Budget Amendment. But even there, in the latest version of the Balanced Budget Amendment, we allow for 5 years before you have to balance the budget, so that we have a period of time in which to at least make some headway towards a balanced budget. And I could go on, but I think basically my concern is that we got too many people in the wagon, not enough pulling the wagon, and just taxing the rich isn't going to do it. Like Dr. Lindsey said, it's going to be less than $1 trillion, about a little less than $900 billion, if you took every dime that they make this next year. And the president's spending $1.3 trillion. I mean, it doesn't add up unless we get everybody somehow working, and unless we cut the size of government, cut the size of the budget, cut back on programs that really we can do without, or we can at least do with less. And it's going to take some real fiscal conservatives to be able to get that done. That's the reason why I've run again. Is I'm in a position where should Romney win, should I become chairman of the Finance Committee, we will have a chance to really take a crack at doing what Dr. Lindsey has said has to be done. Yeah, sorry to go on like that.
It's a great question. Why is money in the private sector or the government sector better? And I've done both. I've worked almost half my life in the government, half my life in the private sector. I've even been a university professor, so I've seen it all. And two things I think are different about the private sector and why I think on net it's a better place to put the money. The first one is, if it's your money at stake, it tends to concentrate the mind. You spend your money better than you would spend someone else's money. And what we do in Washington is spend someone else's money, and you spend your money better than Washington can spend your money. The second reason is, let's say you don't spend your money well in the private sector. You don't have it anymore. And particularly in business, if you don't do a good job, you run out of money and you go out of business. When government runs out of money, it simply comes to the rest of us for more. So I think putting the money in the private sector really does make a lot of sense, because people spend their money better than they spend somebody else's money, and if they don't do a good job, they're out of business pretty quick.
Well, let me ask a follow-on question to this, to both of you. Many people have proposed a flat tax, and that would resolve many of the concerns and issues that you've brought up. What's the feeling about a flat tax, both from the political side and from the academic side, if you will? And if we were to engage one, what would that rate be?
You want to take a crack, Larry? I'll be glad to follow.
Well, what we have is not today a flat tax. It doesn't look like Kansas. It looks more like the Sierra Nevadas, right? Sharp, jagged peaks and valleys. And so I'm at least in the camp of, say, a flatter tax. So that would be the direction to move in. What we've done is create a series of exemptions, because well-intentioned, nice-sounding ideas backed by special interests say, you really don't want to tax us at that higher rate. And, well, okay, we'll give you your what you want, home mortgage interest deduction, for example. Sounds great. Well, if you do that, you're not collecting money, which means you got to raise the rate still more on everybody else. And when we do that, another interest comes, oh my gosh, my rate's higher. So that's how we've gotten to where we are. And I think the idea of a flat tax is that you kind of level out the mountains and the valleys, and you tax everything at essentially the same rate. I think that's a good idea. As to what the rate should be, I have a very simple formula. And may I poll test it in this audience?
Sure.
How many, so everyone's got to vote. We're going to get audience participation here. Think about working a 5-day week. I'm going to ask you where you think government should stop taking your paycheck. In other words, where you should stop working for the government and where you should start working for yourself. So let's start with a good case. How many people think everyone should work Monday through Friday for Uncle Sam? All 5. Oh, I didn't think so. How about Monday through Thursday? How about Monday through Wednesday? How about those rich guys? Don't you think they should work Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday for Uncle Sam? Oh, gosh. I don't think Obama's going to get a lot of votes here. How about Monday and Tuesday? How many people think folks should work Monday and Tuesday for Uncle Sam and at least work 3 days for themselves? All right. How many people think people should work Monday for Uncle Sam? All right. Well, actually, that's where I am. And you know what? I guess I've been in Washington long, Senator. I'm a bit of a moderate on these things. So I call it the Monday rule and the Tuesday rule. And I think that what's fair, as far as rates go, is most people should work Monday for Uncle Sam. And even the rich should never have to work more than Monday and Tuesday for Uncle Sam. I kind of like to cut it off Tuesday lunch or something like that. Well, that sounds reasonable, and that's kind of where the rate should be. The rate should be maybe 20% at tops for most people, and kind of in the 30s maybe, Monday lunch, maybe Monday afternoon, you know, after that, you start, you know, working on your email after lunch. Instead. Sometime during there, I think we should cut it off, and that's as high as the taxes should go.
I'm very interested in that. I love his analogies. I think we can all learn a great deal from Dr. Lindsey, and I've learned a great deal from him over the years. My friend Steve Forbes thinks a flat tax is the answer to everything, and so do a number of other conservative economists. It isn't really that simple. I was very intrigued. I was mentioning to Larry on the way down that Art Laffer, who was one of the gurus on the starting the supply-side economics during the Reagan administration, he felt that we should have a flat tax of 10% on everybody. 10% of what you earn, you pay to the government. And then we ought to have a value-added tax of another 10% on goods and services. I thought that was very interesting, because one of the things I'm worried about is if 51% of all households, remember, that's not just individuals, it's multiple people in most cases, 51% of all households don't pay any income taxes. Maybe the only way you can get them to help with the burden is through value-added taxes on goods and services. I have trouble with value-added taxes because it's so easy to increase them. Government officials can increase them, and we found that in Europe especially to be the case. But I would like a simplified tax code. Romney wants to bring, the president first said he'll bring corporate tax rates down to 28%. He didn't say anything about the pass-through companies, the partnerships, the subchapter S companies, et cetera, most of which are small businesses. He didn't say anything about doing anything for them. We do have the highest corporate tax rate in the world. Japan just recently reduced theirs of 35%. Most corporations don't pay 35%, but if we try to repatriate those funds, those better than $1 trillion, probably $1.7 trillion, being left overseas because of our stupid tax code, they don't want to come back and pay 35% to bring those monies back, which also is crippling our economy. We've got to find ways around that, and Chairman Camp over in the House has come up with what, and I believe in this as well, has come up with what's called a territorial system. Now, his approach hasn't been perfected yet, but it's something that we need to move towards. I mean, there are all these areas that we've got to move towards, but it would be much simpler if we all knew that we all had to pay a certain amount, and I don't know that you could do a flat tax without at least 2 or 3 or 4 various graduations, but I'm intrigued by it. I'm certainly looking at it, and I've read a number of books on it, and have listened to a number of colleagues. I'll tell you this, I'm going to be talking to people like Dr. Lindsey here to see what we can do that would bring people together, both left and right, and get this country back on its feet, especially for you young people and for your future.
Well, great. Let me pull another question from the audience here. Dr. Lindsey, you helped design the 2001 and 2003 Tax Relief Acts under President Bush. I hear that more tax relief is needed. Can you explain why it is so important that we reform the tax system now?
Well, we have 2 competing things. We do have to get more revenue. I don't want to argue with that. On the other hand, you know, we're already getting as much blood from the stone as you can. I'll just put it in perspective. All right, I am not Steve Forbes. I'm not Warren Buffett. I do well. I have a nice, profitable business, okay? Next January 1, my tax rate on the cash flow in my business will be, this is just federal, will be 43.6%. Right. All day Monday, all day Tuesday, till about 10:30 in the morning on Wednesday. And then I get to start working for the state of Virginia. And I work through lunch for the state of Virginia, okay? nobody, when it's actually put to them that that's what you're expecting people to pay, think it's fair. No, well, a few people, but 90% of the country thinks that's too much. It is morally wrong. It is also economically wrong. Because if you expect me to work Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday for the government, guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to hit the golf course. So the money isn't going to come in. So not only is it economically sensible, it's not morally sensible. And the only way you're going to get the revenue you need is not to raise rates, it's to broaden the base. And that's tax reform.
Great. Another question. Senator, as a newcomer to politics, I'm delusioned by the hyper-partisan agenda of most politicians. I appreciate your strength in the primary against such tendencies. How can we encourage more of this strength and bipartisanship?
That's by getting involved. Every one of you need to get involved. You're involved here, coming and listening to one of the truly great economic minds in our country who has had tremendous government experience, tremendous private sector experience, who's very successful himself, and as you can see, somewhat cynical about whether we're going to get through our problems. I think you've got to get involved. I think you've got to get more than just going out and voting. You've got to actually get involved. Utah's not a bad example. I mean, we have basically a conservative congressional group. But that doesn't mean you can't get involved monetarily and otherwise in other states and throughout the country. I personally believe that this presidential election, we're fond of saying this is the most important election in history, but this one really is. Listen, we hit $16 trillion national debt today. It was going up every day on the counter at the National Convention last week. And it's apparent that if this president is reelected, and I'm not trying to be partisan, I like President Obama personally, but if he gets reelected with the approaches that he and the Democrats are taking, we're going to be well over $20 trillion in the next 4 years. We can't do it. We simply can't do it. I thought Larry Lindsey made a tremendous point, or set of points, of where we're going towards Spain and Italy and I think even Greece, if we don't get this under control. And the only way we're going to, and I'll tell you something, if you look at one particular group that probably elected President Obama the last time, it was students just like you who got involved because he was, quote, cool, unquote. And he is cool. He's got a great smile. He's a nice guy to be around in a lot of ways. I like him personally. But I don't think he's running the country. I think there are a number of people in the White House who are running the country and a lot of czars that are running the country. And they're running us right into the ground, and he has no way of stopping that. In fact, I don't think he wants to stop it. Now, you're going to have to get involved. Now, we Republicans occasionally put up some really ridiculous people, too. So both parties can be blamed to a degree, but the Republican Party is considered the more fiscally conservative party. I think you got to get involved. I really do. And frankly, it isn't compassionate to spend this country into debt and claiming you're helping people, and to spend us into bankruptcy. That's not compassion. In fact, it's anything but compassion. And that's what my friends on the other side seem to want to do. They keep themselves in power by taking your money, spending it, and then pretending that they're compassionate with your money. And frankly, we've got to stop it. Now, there's some Republicans who do that too. And you raise a point about working together. The Democrats have gone almost all to the left. Republicans have gone pretty far to the right. And I'm talking about the Senate now. And the House probably the same. We still have to find ways of working together in the best interest of this country. And I intend to do that without giving up any principles. But most things in legislative bodies involve compromise. We can't pass a bill without some Democrats. And it's pretty apparent they have a rough time passing a bill without some Republicans, except for Obamacare, where they had 60 votes in the Senate. And not one Republican voted for it in the Senate, not one Republican voted for it in the House. we're going to have to get to a point where we have to work together in the best interest of the country, and we have to buckle our belts. I think this is an overwhelming case by Dr. Lindsey here today that we're headed to disaster unless we can get more serious people in the Congress who literally are willing to do what has to be done and let the American people understand what has to be done and articulate it. We're a long way from that right now, in my opinion, but I think, who knows, maybe this election will help turn that around a little bit, and I hope that it will.
Perhaps I can ask a follow-up question to that. If we were to ask Dr. Lindsey and other economists what things should be cut, they could probably go through very nicely and sit down and say, well, we should cut these programs here, reduce funding here and there. But when it comes back to the politicians after consulting with the economists, now you still have a lot of work there to go through all special interest groups, and you can have really a reasonable disagreement about where to best spend money, whether it's military or education. There are certainly very reasonable areas that you may disagree about where to spend money. But how do you go from the economists' recommendations and other budget experts' recommendations on where to cut to the political side of, well, someone's going to have to feel some pain for having their projects or things that benefit them cut? How do you do that politically?
We do have to do tax reform. I filed a bill along with Senator McConnell, the minority leader, that said, again, let's kick the can down the road for 1 year. Let's put it over for 1 year, because the president said in 2010 that the economy is so fragile that you couldn't afford to raise taxes on anybody. And yet this time, with the economy even more fragile, he wants to raise taxes on the so-called rich. Now, you know, I believe that would be a disaster to do that. And I believe that, you know, I believe we're just going to have to get together and find ways of conserving and find ways of handling these problems. Now, let me give you an illustration. You know, what they say is we need tax reform. And what I suggest that we do is put it over for a year and dedicate that whole year to tax reform. Now, some people think that's an easy thing to do, and they think that we don't have to raise taxes because we can take all these we can find all the money in extra tax, extra benefits that businesses and others have gotten. Well, let me give you the first 10 tax expenditures, is what we call them. The first 10 cover 2/3 of all tax expenditure spending. Now, look how hard it is to cut some of these or to do away with them. The first one is, I believe it's home mortgage interest deduction. Now, some have said, well, allow home mortgage interest deduction on the first house, but not on subsequent houses. The home industry, the home building industry says that would be catastrophic at a time when we're weak right now. Okay, you can go down the, well, no, the first one is corporate provision of corporate provided health care.
Healthcare, right.
What about 401ks? You could go right on down through every one of those first 10, which is 2/3 of the extra spending that we would hope to save by doing tax reform. Every one of those has a good policy reason for in existence. Number 10 has to be something we in Utah think is extremely important in a great country, and that is deductibility of charitable deductions or charitable donations. Now think about it. Do you want to do away with that? A lot of churches, a lot of charities in this society would go down and wouldn't be able to exist if we did that. And a country that's a great country, it seems to me, would be a charitable country as well. It's really, really tough when it gets down to rug cutting time as to what we can save on. Larry mentioned the SGR. That's the doc fix, about $320 billion or thereabouts. Okay. I think we have a stupid method of budgeting in the Congress, and I'm going to pump Larry for every idea I can get to how we might change that. But take the AMT, the alternative minimum tax. My gosh, that was enacted to take care of to see that 155 millionaires who didn't pay taxes one year could pay some taxes. Today, it can affect upwards of 28 million people, and if we don't patch that, we did it in the Senate, the House hasn't done it yet, but if we don't patch that, that means there'll be a $92 billion tax increase come next April on everybody, you know, on everybody who pays taxes. I mean, these are real big problems, and we're going to have some bipartisanship in order to solve these problems. And it's going to be the Finance Committee that's going to be at the forefront of solving these problems, along with the Ways and Means Committee. Fortunately, you have a very good chairman in Dave Camp over on the Ways and Means Committee, and a number of very good people on that committee. And our committee, it's pretty partisan in some ways, even though in the past the Finance Committee has been known as a bipartisan committee. We're just going to have to see, but that's why I say it's important who we let control the Congress. I've gone on too long, but those are some important things, I think.
Another question from the audience. What are some ideas that you have to strengthen Social Security? Either of you?
Well, let's listen to Larry on that.
I'm going to be collecting my Social Security. Senator Hatch is going to be collecting his Social Security. The people who have to worry about collecting their Social Security are you all. And I have a proposal for you. Right now, we have a formula that determines your Social Security benefits. That means even if you make exactly what I made, paid exactly what I paid in Social Security taxes, you will be getting higher benefits than I get. Now, we could get almost 100% of the way to making sure Social Security works forever if we change that deal. We adjust everything for inflation, but all we say is the current benefit formula stays forever. I'm not going to go into the wonky ways of how you do the formula. But if you're willing to say, I don't want higher benefits if I don't pay higher taxes after inflation, then we can save Social Security. That's the easy one. And so I'll take that one. You solve Medicare, Senator, and I got a Social Security solution for you.
It gives me the easy job, I can see that. Well, you know, it's apparent, you know, when Social Security came into existence, you lived the average life expectancy was a few years beyond when it came into existence. Today, if you live to age 74 in relatively good health, you're going to live at least to age 90 and probably 100. I mean, that's how, and you'll be on Social Security almost all that time. There's also a formula that basically those at the top level are getting quite a bit of Social Security. Now, compared to what they paid in and all that, maybe it's justified. But look, we know that under this administration, the average wage has gone down from about 54,000 plus to 50,000. The top level recipients of Social Security who didn't retire till they were 70 are now getting somewhere around 45,000 a year. I mean, think about that. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think that's right. Now, it's right economically, but I don't think it's right morally. Well, the bottom folks are, now true, they didn't pay as much in and all that, and they didn't wait till age 70. But we've got to find some way of adjusting that. It's clear we're going to have to raise the years. That's going to happen. It'll have to be gradually. That's what they did during the Reagan years. And that worked pretty well up until just recently. But Social Security is right now not paying for itself. Medicare is well, Social Security is what, about $18 trillion in unfunded liability? Medicare is around $38.5 trillion in unfunded liability, and Medicaid's almost that bad. We can't live with Medicaid and Medicare with those higher responsible rates that they owe. I mean, we just can't. We're going to have to make some decisions that are in your favor as young people. that really don't affect those 55 years or older. That's what the Ryan plan does. And what he did is he took the premium support program right out of Part D, which was, some people criticize that as another spending program, which it was, to help seniors be able to afford their pharmaceuticals. All of this is complex, very, very complex, but I think if people of goodwill on both sides really got together, and we listened to people like, you know, Dr. Lindsey here, we could solve these problems for you. It'd take a period of time to do it. The Ryan plan doesn't balance the budget by 2020. It's years after that it balances. But he's taken a realistic approach that we're going to have to gradually do the things that it takes to bring this down. I'd like a stronger approach than that, but it's hard to sell.
You know, Senator, you said a number, and it was a big number, 38 trillion. That was just the I just want to put it in perspective for the people here. So 38 trillion is about 2.5 times the size of our economy. So basically, over the rest of your life, your working life, remember Senator Hatch and I don't have anything to worry about. This could be you. Just to cover the Medicare unfunded liability, you will have to work 2.5 years for zero. Meaning the government, to cover that liability, has to take 100% of everything that is produced out of the rest of your working life just to cover that unfunded liability. You know, good luck to you. And another 1.5 years for Social Security, and another 2.5 years to cover the Medicaid liability. So we're going to work 6.5 years for nothing in your lifetime out of a 40-year working life just to cover the holes we have already dug for ourselves.
I hope you all watched our convention last week. You could only see an hour a day. I was there all the time. I hope you watch the Democrat convention. You're going to hear a lot of demagoguing about the Republicans want to cut Medicare, they want to cut Medicaid, and they want to cut Social Security. Bull. We want to save them. And I'll tell you, we think it's critical that we save those programs. We don't want to change them as much as to save them. We want to save them for you and for future generations. And we can if we just have the guts to make some of the changes that have to be made without affecting those who are currently on or about to come on Social Security and Medicare.
One last question, and this is kind of related from a student. Thank you for all of the work you have done for Utah, Senator Hatch. How does your age affect your ability to serve? We might add, thank you for not going on Social Security just yet.
29 is tough, isn't it, Senator?
Well, I guess I start off by saying I'm a tough old bird. Nobody outworks me back there. I do understand these things, and I intend to do a lot about them, and have ever since I've been there. Problem is, I've been in a distinct minority the whole time. You know, we've never had, now this is astounding to people, but it's true. We've never had a fiscal conservative majority in the Senate, my 36 years in the Senate. Really, we've won some things from time to time, but basically we've always had 3 to 6 more liberal Republicans go with the almost all liberal Democrats on spending issues. And that's been a really big burden for us to carry. Now, maybe it's because of a lack of leadership or something like that. I intend to bring leadership should we get control of the Finance Committee. And even if we don't, I'm still the Republican leader on that committee, and nothing happens there without an awful lot of input from me. So, but having control of it and unifying our side and trying to get some people on their side to go with us, which I think I can do, I think we can do some very good things. Now, I do have to admit that being as old as I am, I'm no longer running at night, and I walk all the time. But as long as I'm there, I'll be giving it everything I possibly have. And I don't think many people doubt. They don't want to get into a battle with me. They don't want to take me on. And a lot of that comes from just never giving up and giving it everything you possibly can. And I feel good. And I intend to make sure I feel good. I get up at 4:45 every morning back in Washington, and I work out every morning before going to the Senate. And I get to the Senate quite early, earlier than anybody else. And I usually don't get home till 8 or 9 at night. If I didn't have Elaine as my wife, I don't think I could do this job the way I do it. But she understands, and she believes in what we're doing, and she supports me fully. She's a wonderful, wonderful wife. And I've had very understanding children, too. Now grandchildren, now great-grandchildren. So as long as I'm there, I'll be giving it everything I have, and that's not inconsiderate, or inconsiderable, I guess I should say.
Thank you, Senator Hatch, Dr. Lindsey. We appreciate both of you coming to this economic forum.